you ever had an experience with a movie or a show where going into it you think to yourself, this probably isn't going to be for me, only to be completely and utterly proven wrong and to absolutely fall in love with it? That was my experience with the 2018 limited series, Mr. Sunshine. I watched Mr. Sunshine for the first time around March 2024, and it's a show that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since my first viewing because everything about this show is damn near perfect. The writing, cinematography, soundtrack, the acting, everything. Sure, no work of art could possibly ever be perfect, but this show sure as hell comes close, at least for me. This is a show filled with action, war, romance, drama. It's tragic, heartfelt, bittersweet, and most importantly of all, a historical epic. Mr. Sunshine has very quickly become one of my all-time favorite shows. And here's why. Before we continue with the video, I'd just like to say that my debut science fiction novel is out now. Link in the description below. So let's start off with the question that you're probably wondering if you're not already familiar with the show. What is Mr. Sunshine about? Mr. Sunshine centers on a young boy named Eugene Choi, a slave living in the Korean kingdom of Joseon. Following the traumatic deaths of his parents, Eugene escapes to America during the 1871 US expedition to Korea and grows up to become a soldier in the Marine Corps. In adulthood, he returns to Joseon as an officer, where he meets and falls in love with a noble woman named Ae-shin, and the story follows the love story between these two characters, set to the backdrop of the real-life Japanese invasion of Korea during the early 1900s. The show stars Byung-hun in the role of Eugene Choi, who you might also know as the frontman from Squid Game, while the role of Ae-shin is played by Tae-ri. The show also centers around three other characters who play equally important roles in the story. A member of the Yakuza named Dong-mae, played by Yeon-seok. The son of Eugene's owners from back when he was a slave, Kim Hyo-son, played by Byun-hun. Also, I'm sorry if I've pronounced that name wrong. It's been a while since I've watched the show, so I've completely forgotten how to pronounce it. And finally, Hina Kudo, played by Min-jung, the owner of Glory Hotel, which the rest of the main cast often frequent. There are many characters in this show, although the main cast I just described are the core focus of the story. So, let's dive into the story and the characters a little bit more in depth. Let's start off with Eugene Choi. He's a character with an empathetic backstory. His family were slaves and his parents were murdered by their owners over reasons that I probably won't spoil in this video. He escapes to America with the help of an American missionary who then raises him in New York City. Eugene faces a lot of discrimination growing up due to being a foreigner and decides that he wants to join the military in an attempt to become an American, a goal which he is obviously successful in. In his adult years, Eugene is a very cold, stoic, bitter, and standoffish person. But as the series goes on, he starts to soften and warm up through his connection with Ae-shin, revealing his compassionate side, which I found to be very rewarding and actually kind of wholesome. This is a character who has led an incredibly difficult, painful life, starting out as incredibly bitter and detached, only to become soft, warm again for the first time since he was a kid. By the time you reach the later episodes of the series, he feels significantly more like a genuine human being compared to the brooding and distant man we were initially introduced to. This leads us to Ae-shin, who is a very interesting character to talk about. She is an aristocratic woman appearing to lead a normal life as a typical Joseon lady, but she lives a secret double life. as a sharpshooter working for a militia named the Righteous Army, fighting against the Japanese invasion. We'll be talking more about the Righteous Army a little later on in the video. She's probably the most patriotic of the main cast, sacrificing everything for Korea's independence, which naturally causes her to wrestle with her love for Eugene, as her responsibilities as a member of the Righteous Army conflict with her desires to be with him. She wants to run away, go to America with him, spend the rest of her life with him, yet she cannot because of how important it is to her for Korea to one day be free from Japanese oppression. One interpretation of her character that I read online, which I really love, although I can't remember who said it, is that Ae-shin herself represents the personification of Korea, and the ways in which the characters who love her or protect her represents how they will ultimately go on to guard the country in their own way. The next member of the main cast I'd discuss is Kim Hyo-seok. He is the son of the family that owned Eugene and his parents back when he was a slave. However, Hyo-seok wasn't born yet when Eugene escaped the country and his parents were killed, so he is unaware of Eugene's connection with his family. He is, technically speaking, a rival to Eugene, as he is engaged to Ae-shin through an arranged marriage. However, while you might expect a character like this to be antagonistic in most stories and dramas, Hyo-seok is the complete opposite. He's actually one of my favorite characters from this show, compared to his family who were cruel enough to kill Eugene's parents, and despite his privileged background, he is a very open-minded, compassionate, and introspective and noble man. He has a very warm, charming, and charismatic presence to him, a very friendly and considerate person. Now, he's not a perfect person. He starts out as a womanizing playboy who pretty much ghosted his entire family, as well as Ae-shin, by staying abroad in Japan for 10 years straight. But as the story goes on, he definitely grows on you the most out of the main cast. He's a very likable, genuine person, and when he discovers Ae-shin's feelings for Eugene, he respects that and lets her go rather than forcing her to be with him. Next up is the character who I personally found to be the most intriguing out of the main cast, Dong-mae, aka Sho Ishida, a Korean member of the Yakuza. His backstory is a tragic one. He is the son of a butcher, a low-status class in Joseon society. After his family is mistreated and killed, he escapes Joseon and rises to prominence in the Japanese criminal underworld before eventually returning to Joseon. Dong-mae has a somewhat of a unique and special connection to Ae-shin because after the tragedy that befell his family back when they were kids, Ae-shin rescued him. He has had feelings for her ever since that have lingered with him all his life, which has resulted in a lot of complicated emotions, as he harbors a deep resentment towards Joseon for how his family was mistreated, yet at the same time feels very strongly for Ae-shin, who is very closely tied to Joseon. Dong-mae is overall a very interesting anti-hero. I did find his fixation on Ae-shin to be kind of creepy, and hell, even some of the other characters in the show call him out on how he has become unhealthily obsessed over her. But in my opinion, the problematic aspects of his character added to his intrigue, and out of everyone in the main cast, he was the one whose personal story I was most curious to find out how it would end. Also, Dong-mae has hella drip. Look at that shade of red, goddamn bro. I'd totally wear that kimono if it was socially acceptable to dress like a samurai here in Australia. Anyway, moving on. The last member of the main cast that's left to discuss is none other than the cunning, glamorous owner of Glory Hotel, Hina Kudo. She's the daughter of one of the show's main antagonists, Lee Wanik. She was born under the name Lee Yanhwa before her father sent her to Japan to marry a wealthy Japanese man, and after her husband dies, she inherits his fortune and adopts the name Hina Kudo as her Japanese name. Using her newfound wealth, she becomes the owner of Glory Hotel, which goes on to become a prominent establishment frequented by the rest of the main cast. She uses her positions of wealth, power, and influence to gain information and subtly exert control over others. She's a character who is a very intelligent manipulator, but at the same time she does have some goodness within her, especially because she's secretly sympathetic to the Korean independence movement. A huge part of her personal story revolves around the search for her mother. I'm not sure how much of that I can really discuss without spoiling the entire subplot, but I found it to be very sympathetic. I remember when I first started watching the series, I felt indifferent towards the character, but the more I learned about her past, the more I saw her character arc unfold, the more interested in her I became, and by the end of the series, I feel like she was one of the most tragic and sympathetic characters in the show. She's someone who feels very betrayed and alienated by her own father, grieving the absence of her mother, and was forced to become strong just to survive, forced to gain power so that she'll never be taken advantage of ever again. She's forced to look after herself and definitely feels like a very lonely, emotionally damaged person underneath the surface of glamour and status. That's all I have to really say about the main cast. There's a lot of very lovable supporting characters throughout the story as well, who helped bring a lot of light and levity to such a tragic story, which I won't be discussing in depth here, otherwise this video will go on forever and ever, but I just wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to some of my favorite supporting characters throughout the show, such as Haman Dake, Ah-bom, Kyle Moore, Jane Sun-gu, Im-gwon-soo, Il-sik, and Chun-sik. So now that the characters are out of the way, let's move on by discussing the story a little bit more in depth, the aspects of it that I enjoyed the most, and by extension, exploring the arcs of these characters and the roles that they played within the story. The story was created by successful South Korean screenwriter Kim Yeon-seok and directed by Lee Eun-bok, who had previously worked together on other projects. Mr. Sunshine covers the historical events of the Joseon dynasty's transition into modernity and Korea's struggle for independence as a result of Japanese colonialism, all of which took place during the late 19th to early 20th centuries. The show doesn't shy away from showing just how terrible this period of Korea's history was, devoting at least 90% of its episodes to endearing you to all of the characters who live in Joseon, only for, in the last few episodes, to just completely rip your heart out when most of these characters are killed off one by one, collateral damage in a war that they should have never had to be a part of. A lot of the deaths towards the end of the series hit pretty hard for me, actually. Most of the characters who get killed off by the end of the series are decent, ordinary people who never deserve to be killed or tortured or hung and executed. But I'm glad that this series didn't shy away from the brutal and harsh realities of war. This was clearly a very bloody and tragic time in Korea's history, and portraying it as if it wasn't as bad as it actually was would have been disrespectful for the real-life victims of this conflict. Speaking of the real-life historical context of the story, another aspect of this period in Korea's history that the show covers is the Righteous Army, a civilian militia that actually existed around this time who rebelled against the Japanese colonials. To my knowledge, only one photograph exists of the Righteous Army, which is recreated within the show. As mentioned previously, Ae-shin leads a double life as a sniper working for the Righteous Army, and her loyalty to this militia is a huge aspect of her personal story. She loses so much during her fight for Korea's independence, but nevertheless embodies a lot of strength, courage, and determination. Patriotism is a huge theme in Mr. Sunshine, and that theme is fully embodied by Ae-shin, whose love for her homeland is a powerful driving force for not just her, but others in the show too, as by the end of the story, so many of Joseon's citizens come together and unite in their shared cause, fighting for their freedom and dignity. Other themes the show covers are identity, belonging, love, colonialism, class, and social inequality, with social inequality and class feeling the most noteworthy themes for me personally. Each member of the main cast come from vastly different social backgrounds in the rigid late Joseon society, which plays a huge role in the romance between Eugene and Ae-shin, as Eugene's past as a slave obviously makes it so that Ae-shin's family and Joseon society as a whole could never ever approve of their relationship. The dramatic difference in their classes is a huge conflict in their love story that the two have to learn to work through. Not to mention Dong-mae's backstory as the son of a lowly butcher is a major source of pain and tragedy for him, which is why he strove to gain as much power as possible through essentially becoming a gangster. He's similar to Eugene in that way, that both of them harboring deep resentment towards Joseon for how they were treated as lowly members of society, only to rise to prominent positions of power and discover the aspects of Joseon that are good and redeemable, of which they were never able to see before. The story of the show is one that is very bittersweet and tragic, with the ending highlighting the heavy costs of war. However, one aspect about this show I really appreciated is that it also had a lot of great humor as well, and it wasn't as completely dark, bleak, and hopeless as you might expect the story to be. The humor, in my opinion, served to endear all of the characters to you in a much more entrenched way, making all of these characters feel significantly more human and real. I feel like this is one of those shows that makes you laugh just as much as cry, and the good times these characters experience in the show makes the tragedy hit so much harder, seeing these characters at their best, their happiest, only to have their lives completely torn down and destroyed by the Japanese invasion. It's like witnessing a beautiful garden, only for that garden to burn in a fire, and you're left with nothing but the bittersweet memory of what once was, of what was taken from you. Overall, the story of Mr. Sunshine was written very beautifully and eloquently, with some of the best developed characters I have ever seen in a TV show. But at the end of the story, everything is wrapped up rather neatly with little to no loose ends, a complete story which, while fiction, fits nicely in the grander historical context that serves as the show's backdrop. I'd talk about the ending, but I don't want to spoil it here. All I'm going to say on the matter is that, considering the real-life historical context of the show, I can't possibly think of a more fitting ending to the story than the one we got. The ending was perfect and felt appropriate for what the creators of the show were trying to accomplish, and it makes you appreciate the real-life sacrifices that real people made during this war so many years ago. So the story and characters of Mr. Sunshine was one that I thoroughly enjoyed, but what are some other aspects of the show that I also enjoyed? Well, for starters, I'd have to say the show's visual presentation and cinematography. I think what I like the most about the visual aspect of this show is that it's so high quality that it feels like a movie instead of a TV show. Apparently this was one of the most expensive Korean dramas at the time, and you could see this in the set design, the cinematography, costumes, lighting, just about everything in this show's visual presentation screams premium. This show is a great example of a piece of entertainment that feels, for lack of a better term, premium. There's a lot of shots in the show that feel like they could be a painting, the visuals that are simply beautiful, and probably one of the most memorable aspects of this show. One other standout aspect of this series was the soundtrack. I absolutely loved the soundtrack for this series. I've kept some of the songs on my Spotify playlist all year long, and the soundtrack is one of the aspects of this show that I'm most excited to talk about. The show's main theme that plays during the opening titles is very good, very catchy, and suits the show's time period rather well. However, this show also features a lot of original songs that play during certain scenes, and I really loved a lot of these original songs. My favorite songs from the show are probably See You Again by Yeon-seok, Good Day by Melomance, and My Home by Savina and Drones. Out of the three, I like See You Again the most. However, my favorite version of that song isn't even featured in the show. It's the original version of the song made by the song's producer, Safira K. I'm not sure why I like that version of the song more. There's just something about it that hits a little harder for me, but I definitely recommend checking out that version of the song too. As for the other two songs, I can't really decide which of the two I like the most. I really enjoy how the folk song Greensleeves is incorporated into the song My Home. Greensleeves plays an important role in the personal story of Eugene Choi, and because My Home is considered to be his theme song, Greensleeves is a part of the chorus. I love how it all comes together. Greensleeves works really well with this song. As for Good Day by Melomance, there is no other word to describe this song but just simply epic. It starts out as gentle, slow, quiet, and soft before erupting into this epic, emotional, triumphant orchestra. This song is also used very effectively during a scene in the final episode, which obviously I'm not going to spoil what happens here, but it was very well done. As for the instrumental music in this show, that was also just as much of a standout as the actual songs themselves. Like I mentioned previously, I love the opening theme. I heard another reviewer, I can't remember who, compare the quality of Mr. Sunshine's theme to that of Game of Thrones, and I think that's a pretty fitting comparison. Mr. Sunshine's theme may not be as grandiose or heart-pumping as Game of Thrones, but it's equally as epic in its own individual way. I also really enjoy how this show incorporates Greensleeves, even though it's not an original piece of music made for the show. As mentioned previously, Greensleeves is strongly tied with Eugene as a character. He even owns a music box that plays Greensleeves. Not only does the melody of the song fit Eugene's melancholic life story rather perfectly, but also the melancholy throughout the story too, as the song eventually becomes associated with Ae-shin too and the complexities of her romance with Eugene. Greensleeves is also the first song you ever hear in the entirety of the show besides the main theme, which does a good job of setting up the vibe and atmosphere of this story. The soundtrack is overall very well made and suits the tone, the vibe of the show very perfectly. Not to mention, it's just simply a very, very memorable soundtrack. It was definitely one of the standout aspects of the show for me personally. But anyway, now that all of that's out of the way, let's move on to my final thoughts. In conclusion, Mr. Sunshine is a very beautiful show and an absolute masterpiece. Out of all of the shows I've seen this year, I think this one is my favorite. Hell, I think it's one of the best things that I've ever seen on Netflix, ever. The artistry of it, the amount of care and thoughtfulness that was put into the show, it gave me an enriching experience that I've never had before when watching any other show or movie. I highly recommend giving it a chance, even if you feel like this isn't the type of show you'd usually enjoy watching. Plus, it was also very interesting to learn about this chapter in Korea's history, which I was unfamiliar with prior to watching this show due to the fact that I'm obviously not from Korea. It's a time period that I never thought I would ever be interested in prior to watching Mr. Sunshine. As a writer, stories like this which are so eloquently written, are such a huge inspiration for me, and I can't help but admire this show for how brilliantly every aspect of it all came together. This was a very memorable show for me that has stuck with me ever since I first saw it, and I'm certain that it's going to stay with me for a long, long time. If you made it this far into the video, then I hope you enjoyed it or that this got you interested in checking out the show for yourself. This is undoubtedly one of the longest videos I have ever created for this channel, but that's only because there was so much that I loved about this show and so much I wanted to talk about. I've seen a lot of shows that I really enjoy, especially this year. I've been watching a lot more shows and TV as of late. But it's been a while since I've last felt truly passionate about a series I've binged. So, I leave it to you. What are your thoughts? Have you seen this series, or are you interested in checking it out? Whatever you think, feel free to let me know in the comments below and like the video. If you're interested in seeing more from me, I cover a lot of movies, shows, video games, and other pop culture that I enjoy on this channel, so if that sounds like content you'd enjoy, feel free to subscribe. I'm also an author, so if you're interested in reading something new, whether that may be sci-fi, fantasy, etc., then feel free to check out my work, links in the description below. Both all that being said, thank you so much for checking out this video, and I hope I'll be seeing you again in the next one.